My name is Victoria, and although I'm only 33, sometimes I feel like a woman who's lived an entire life with its ups and downs, its small joys and great losses, the eternal search for balance between what fate has given me and what I've built with my own hands. I work as a dentist in a private clinic. Day after day, I see patients, hear their complaints, treat their teeth, smile when they thank me, and think to myself, this is probably that ordinary life that many are content with and that others so desperately strive for. I have my own apartment, although the word own sounds a little bittersweet, because every month I transfer another mortgage payment to the bank, and sometimes it seems like this apartment belongs more to the cold numbers in the account than to me. But still, I have a roof over my head, a decent job, and a steady routine, and that's probably where I can begin the story of how it all came together. My father died when I was 12, and it was the blow that split my world into before and after, because it all happened so suddenly, so improbably, as if someone had brazenly ripped the most important figure from my life, leaving me no time to say goodbye or even prepare. He suffered a heart attack right at home, and I still remember my mother's screams, the smell of medicine, and the feeling of emptiness when the doctor merely shook his head. My mother was devastated. I watched her wake up every morning in our empty kitchen and pretend to brew coffee out of habit, not for the taste. But life, strangely enough, always demands continuation. And 2 years later, when I was 14, she married a man named Robert. Robert had a daughter from his first marriage, a girl named Emma, who was 9 years old at the time. When she and my mother married and came to live with us in a house that still smelled of my father's belongings and where every wall held his presence, I felt scared and strange accepting these new people into my space. But I decided not to play the victim and to try to build a relationship with them, because I knew that otherwise living together would become unbearable. Emma turned out to be a very lively and rather funny child. We sat together in front of the TV and played video games. Sometimes I explained math to her or helped her write essays, and this brought us closer than I could have expected. Robert also tried to enter my life carefully and respectfully, not rushing to impose himself or pretending to be my new father. He came to my school concerts, clapped louder than everyone else, smiled his slightly shy, smiling face. We had family barbecues in the yard, roasting corn and meat, laughing and taking pictures with my mom's old camera. Overall, it was just normal. Not something to be excited about, but not something to complain about either. We celebrated Christmas together, put presents under the tree, went to the lake for a couple of days in the summer, and it all added up to that very family life where there are minor irritations, but also a lot of simple, human warmth. I mostly got along with Emma, although she could be a bore and clingy, like any younger sister, and yet I accepted her for who she was. And Robert never tried to replace my father, and for that I was grateful, because I didn't have to feel like someone was taking up the place my dad would forever have in my heart. After high school, I entered medical school, and from that point on, I gradually began to drift apart from my family, not because of arguments or misunderstandings, but simply because my studies were completely absorbing. Endless lectures, late-night shifts, internships, and then my first steps into the profession. By the time I graduated and found a job at a clinic, my life had become separate and independent, and meetings with my mother, Robert, and Emma were limited to Christmas, Thanksgiving, and maybe Easter. We occasionally messaged on Facebook or called for a few minutes, but that was it. Emma, meanwhile, was also growing up, and the last time we really spoke was when she was in college trying to figure out business studies or something close to it. And then our paths diverged completely, without drama or hard feelings. Last year brought another loss. My grandmother, my mother-in-law, passed away at 89. She lived a long and dignified life, but her death hit me hard because she was my last connection to my father, to the part of my family that no one could ever take away from me. The funeral was difficult. I sat in a black dress, unable to hold back my tears, and to my surprise, my mother, Robert, and Emma were sitting next to me, and their presence warmed me, even though we hadn't all been together for a long time. The last time we saw each other in the same room was probably 2 years ago. After the service, the lawyer began reading the will, and at first everything seemed as expected. Some money for the family, a few pieces of jewelry for my mother and other female relatives. But then he said something I hadn't expected. My grandmother left me her apartment. It was small, 2 rooms, but in a good neighborhood, solid and respectable. I sat there, stunned, because even though I knew how much my grandmother loved me, I had no idea she had intended it this way. This apartment, which by today's standards was probably worth around $250,000, maybe more, became something of a gift from the past, a bridge between me and my father, and at the same time an unexpected turn in my adult life. After leaving the lawyer's office, we all headed to the nearest coffee shop because after the funeral and the formalities, we needed to warm up a little, catch our breath, and discuss what had just happened. I was sitting at a table by the window, holding a large latte and slowly stirring the sugar, when the words suddenly slipped out, as if by themselves. "I think I'll rent out my grandmother's apartment," I said, trying to sound calm and confident, though inside I was still reeling from the shock of the unexpected inheritance. I tried to explain how the rental income could be a real lifesaver, allowing me to pay off the mortgage faster, and my words were so practical that I almost believed it was the only sensible solution. Mom and Robert exchanged glances, and I immediately caught that special family signal when 2 people who have lived together for a while can share an entire conversation with just a glance. And this silent exchange made me tense. "Actually, dear," Mom said, leaning a little closer, "we wanted to talk to you about this." And at that moment, as if waiting for a cue, Emma, who had been sitting silently until then, thoughtfully fiddling with her napkin, perked up. "I'm dating someone," she announced, as if that should explain everything. "His name is Jake. We've been together for 2 years. 2 years? I blurted out, and I felt surprise betray my face. I truly hadn't known, and it was painful to suddenly realize how far I'd drifted from my family, how even such important things had passed me by. "That's great," I said out loud, trying to smile and hide my embarrassment, although inside I couldn't understand why she'd brought up her boyfriend now. At that moment, Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand tightly, as if she wanted to prepare me for something serious. "The thing is, they need a place to live. Jake's lease ends next month, and Emma has this tiny studio apartment she can barely even turn around in. Your grandmother's place would be perfect for them." There it was, the offer I probably should have seen coming, but somehow didn't. "So you want them to live there, not for me to rent it out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and clarifying rather than irritated. "Just temporarily," Emma interrupted quickly, her eyes shining with hope. "We just want to get a little stronger, save up some money, and then we'll think about our own place." I looked at them all, at Mom with her persistently soft smile, at Robert nodding in support, at Emma with her shining eyes, and suddenly I felt a strong sense that this was my family, albeit a patchwork one, and that to refuse would be to betray their hopes. I actually did have my own place, and I wasn't planning on moving into my grandmother's apartment. "I think that could work," I said slowly, as if tasting the words. "How long are we talking about?" Robert jumped in. "They could pay the utilities, take care of the repairs, and keep things tidy." I sighed and nodded. "Fine. Let them live there, but only for a year, and all the utilities, all the upkeep, is entirely your responsibility." Emma gasped with joy, almost jumping out of her chair. "Thank you so much, Victoria. Well, you're simply the best." Mom squeezed my hand even tighter and quietly said, "You have no idea how much this means to all of us." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was already starting to worry. How long would it take to pay off the mortgage without the extra income from rent? But I told myself that family comes first. That's what Dad would do, and it made me feel a little better. 2 weeks later, Emma and Jake moved into Grandma's apartment. I met him for just a few minutes when I handed him the keys, and my first impression was pleasant. Tall, calm, With a gentle smile, he worked somewhere nearby and spoke politely without pretense. They seemed happy together, and I even caught myself being happy for Emma. The apartment, too, looked well kept because Emma had always been known for her neatness and orderliness. The months flew by. I was faithfully paying the mortgage solely from my salary at the dental clinic, and of course, it was harder than I'd expected, but bearable. And I was learning to live within my means, saving every spare dollar wherever I could. Emma and Jake seemed to have settled in well, and I sincerely believed that everything was working out just as it should. Family had helped family, everyone was happy, and there was something reassuring in that certainty. A year passed, and I honestly almost forgot that this was originally a temporary arrangement. My life was busy. Patients, surgeries, constant fatigue, trying to find time for myself. Sometimes I thought about how nice it would be to have that extra income from rent, but I tried not to dwell on it. Emma would text me from time to time. A faucet was leaking, a light bulb needed replacing, and each time I was reassured by the knowledge that Jake knew how to fix most things himself. They kept the apartment in good order, always paid the bills on time, and I had no reason to worry. Everything seemed like life was back on track. I was beginning to realize that this arrangement, despite my doubts, was actually working. After all, even though I was losing the rental income, I knew the apartment was under the care of family, not strangers who might treat it half-heartedly. Emma sounded genuinely grateful every time we spoke, and I felt almost at peace with the decision, as if I'd entrusted my grandmother's home to safe hands. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in March, as I stood at the stove stirring a thick pasta sauce, the phone in my pocket vibrated, and my mother's name lit up the screen. "Hi, Mom," I said, picking it up. "Hi, honey." Her voice was soft and especially gentle. "We were wondering if you'd like to stop by for dinner on Saturday around 6 o'clock. I smiled. "Sure, that sounds nice. Should I bring anything?" "Just myself, and you know how Robert loves Miller's apple pie." I laughed. "Okay, I'll pick one up on the way." On Saturday, I actually stopped by Miller's Bakery, where the sweet aroma of cinnamon and vanilla was so overwhelming that I wanted to buy everything at once. But I gritted my teeth, grabbed one large pie, and headed to my mom's house. As I pulled up, I noticed more cars than usual in the driveway. Emma's old Honda, Jake's pickup, and another car I'd never seen before. Something inside me fluttered, a premonition that dinner wouldn't be so ordinary. Robert opened the door, beaming his wide smile, and led me into the dining room, where Mom, Emma, and Jake were sitting at the table, along with an older couple I'd never met before. "These are my parents, Dave and Linda." Jake introduced them, and I set the pie down on the table and sank into an empty chair. It felt a little strange to be surrounded by strangers at a family dinner I'd imagined would be more intimate, but I decided not to make a big deal out of it. The conversation began as usual. Robert told his usual dad jokes that made everyone roll their eyes but still laugh, and I shared a couple of funny stories from my practice where patients came in with completely unbelievable dental cases. The laughter lightened the atmosphere, and I was already feeling quite relaxed when I noticed Mom and Robert exchange that look I knew all too well, the same one they'd exchanged in the coffee shop after Grandma's funeral. "Actually," Mom began, carefully placing her fork on her plate, "we had a reason for inviting you today." I pricked up my ears, raising an eyebrow. "For all of you, then?" Emma leaned forward sharply, her eyes sparkling. "Jake proposed," she said, holding out her left hand, the ring glinting in the lamplight. "Congratulations," I exclaimed, genuinely happy for her. "When did it happen?" 2 weeks ago, Jake replied with a wide grin. "We're thinking of getting married in about 6 months." "That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both," I said. But Mom, as if waiting for this moment, interjected, "Actually, that's exactly what we wanted to talk about. We need help with expenses." Emma then pulled a neat folder overflowing with printouts from under the table. "Jake and I have already planned everything, scouted locations, looked at decorators, got quotes." She opened the folder and placed it in front of me, and on the very first page was a figure that took my breath away. The total was about $80,000. I nearly choked on the water I'd just sipped. 80,000 in one day? I asked, not hiding my shock. A tense silence fell over the room, and everyone's eyes, filled with hope, turned to me. "And what exactly are you asking of me?" I asked slowly, trying to keep my voice even. Emma bit her lip. "Well, you have a great job, and you're always financially sound. We were hoping you could help." I looked straight at her. "Emma, I really want to help you with the wedding, but $80,000 is crazy. That's not help, that's a disaster. I can give you $20,000. That would be a very generous wedding gift." And the moment I said those words, the mood in the room changed dramatically. Emma's face fell, as if I'd just doused her with cold water. Jake looked away with noticeable disappointment, and his parents exchanged glances as if all their approval and warmth had vanished at that moment. Everyone froze and stared at me as if I'd just broken some sacred rule they'd held in their heads, but which no one had told me about. Mom was the first to break the silence. Her voice was soft, but there was something demanding, almost imperative in those gentle intonations. "Darling, you have a good job, a stable income. You could easily afford to give your sister that kind of money for her wedding." At that moment, I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, the heat spread across my face, and I found it hard to breathe, knowing that behind this outward concern lay pressure, and behind the request, a demand. "Mom, I don't live in the clouds either. I pay a mortgage. I save for my future." I tried to protest, but Emma jerked her head up and snorted. "What future do you have? You don't even have a man. That means you won't have any future." These words, thrown with such ease and cruelty, slashed at me like a sharp knife. Everyone at the table quietly but clearly laughed, and it wasn't kind or warm, but rather sticky and cold, like a taunt in a school hallway. The sound turned me inside out, and I realized I couldn't sit at that table any longer and pretend nothing was happening. I slowly put down my fork and, looking directly at Emma, said, "After saying that, I won't give you a cent for your wedding. If you want an expensive ceremony, save up for it yourself." Jake's parents immediately began to fuss, waving their hands as if trying to clear the air. His mother, Linda, exclaimed, "You're acting terribly, not at all like a sister." I turned to her and replied icily, "Okay, then maybe you could pay for your son's $80,000 wedding?" Their faces turned pale, and they immediately backed away. "We're retired. We don't have that kind of money," Jake's father muttered. I shrugged, feeling a certain determination welling up within me. Then let Emma and Jake live within their means and plan their wedding based on their income. And then Emma, flushed with anger, abruptly jumped up from her chair and shouted, "You know what? You're toxic. You're belittling me financially and being arrogant. We need to take a break from our relationship. You won't be invited to the engagement or the wedding." I glanced at my parents, still hoping they would stop her, that my mother would say, "Emma, you're overreacting." But my mother sat silently, her eyes downcast, and Robert nodded and quietly added, "By refusing to help, you're depriving yourself of a family." I stared at them for several long seconds, and something inside me crumbled, broke, as if someone were squeezing glass in a fist. Then I nodded slowly and said, "I understand perfectly and accept your decision." I rose from the table, grabbed my purse, and trying to stand up straight, said, "Thank you for dinner." I walked out the door, and not a single person, not my mother, not my sister, not even Robert, called me back, tried to stop me or take back their words. When I got into the car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove home in complete silence, and the silence was deafening, punctuated by snatches of laughter, Emma's words, Robert's nods. Back at the apartment, I didn't even bother taking off my shoes, just sank onto the couch and stared at the wall. My thoughts wouldn't form words, only one thought thrummed through my head. My own family had just kicked me out because of money, and it wasn't even about the money, I had plenty of that. It was about them thinking I was obligated, that my life and my work were worthless, that I was nothing but a source for other people's desires. The next morning I woke up still with a lump of rage in my chest. I barely slept, replaying dinner in my head all night. How they laughed at me. How my mother sat silently letting Emma insult me. How they all unanimously decided I owed them $80,000 just because I had a job. I made coffee on autopilot and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Fine, I thought. If they want to cut me out of the family, so be it. But I'm not going to support Emma's life anymore while they treat me like trash. I opened new tabs and started calculating. How much was I really losing by renting out my grandmother's apartment to Emma for next to nothing? I looked through the listings in the area. Similar two-bedroom apartments were renting for $1,000 a month, and some even for $1,200 with minor renovations. I started quickly calculating. 1,200 times 12 months equals over $14,000 a year. $14,000 that I was losing so Emma could live carefree and save for her ridiculous wedding. I leaned back in my chair and realized I'd had enough. I was done with this. I heard my sister's voice on the phone, broken, trembling, as if she was about to scream, and somewhere deep inside me, a shadow of regret flickered, but it instantly dissolved in the memory of how not long ago my entire family had laughed at me at that dinner, how Emma had called me toxic, and Mom and Robert had sat there nodding in agreement. I can, and that's exactly what I'm doing, I replied in a cool, calm voice, trying to keep every note from wavering. You and Jake have exactly 30 days to pack your things and move out. It's official. You've received notice, and everything is legal. Emma screamed so loudly that I involuntarily pulled the phone away from my ear. You have no right, she screamed. But you promised. This is Grandma's apartment. It belongs to the whole family, not just you. I took a deep breath and said slowly, the apartment is mine, according to the will. Only mine, and I was the one who let you live there. I believed you about it being temporary, but a year has turned into a trap, and now I'm putting an end to it. It's official, and you know it. There was silence on the other end, heavy and echoing, and I could almost hear Emma trying to hold back her tears, but instead she flared up again. You're ruining my life. Do you want us to end up on the street? Do you want me to skip my wedding? I laughed softly, but there was no joy in it, only weariness. No, Emma, I just want you to start living within your means. You're a grown woman. You and your fiancé should build your own lives, not hang around my neck like a weight. If you don't have money for a wedding and a place to live, maybe you should think about getting married at all now. She gasped, as if I'd struck her. You're jealous, she sobbed. You're alone, miserable, with a mortgage and no man. You're just taking revenge on me because I have love and you have nothing. These words might have hurt me recently, but now they sounded empty, like a cheap performance. I have self-respect, Emma, I said firmly, and that's what matters most. You and Jake are adults. Work, pay rent, save money. I'm not your insurance anymore. At that moment, another voice appeared on the line, heavy, restrained. It was Jake. Victoria, he began, trying to speak calmly. You have to understand, we were counting on this place. I work a lot, but it's difficult for us. We simply won't have time to find a new place in a month. I sat up straight on the couch and replied, Jake, you're a man. You're responsible for yourself and the woman you love. You'll find a place if you want to. Believe me, you've had this whole year to save, look, and plan, but you chose to waste your energy dreaming of an $80,000 wedding. Well, now you have 30 days to face reality. That's my final word. For a moment, no one spoke, and all I heard was someone sobbing in the background. Then Emma muttered through clenched teeth, You'll regret it. You'll be alone one day, and then you'll understand what it means to lose your family, and then it will be too late. I tiredly pinched the bridge of my nose and said, Emma, I already realized it. That very night at dinner, I don't have a family anymore, but you know what I have left? My right to my life. Good night. I pressed the red button and dropped the phone next to the noodle box. I sat motionless, feeling a mixture of emotions swirling inside me. Bitterness, anger, relief, and a terrifying emptiness. Her words about me being miserable and alone rang in my head, but at the same time, a strange strength simmered within me, as if I'd finally stopped making excuses and apologizing for simply defending my boundaries. My phone continued to blink with unread messages, but I didn't even glance at the screen. I turned on the TV, took a long sip of cheap wine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a taste of freedom, bitter, but so real. I began to sort through my grandmother's old closets, rummaging through stacks of yellowed towels and boxes of china that had remained untouched since the days when she still hosted Sunday dinners. Frankly, every single thing resonated with a quiet pain, but at the same time, I felt a sense of liberation, as if I was shaking out not only old junk from the apartment, but also the sticky weight that this whole family situation had heaped upon me. I tidied up the kitchen, repainted the walls a light, almost milky color to make the room feel larger and fresher, hired workers to replace the old flooring and freshen up the bathroom, and while they hammered and carried tiles, I sat on the windowsill with a cup of coffee and thought about how, for the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself, not to please Mom, Robert, or Emma. Every morning, I crossed off the days on the calendar, counting down the days until the apartment was finally vacant. And although I was a little nervous inside, what if they started a scene, refused to move out, or Jake decided to play the hero and throw himself into the fray? The days passed surprisingly quietly, as if everyone had given in and accepted the inevitable. Sometimes I caught myself listening to the phone, expecting my mother to call at any moment, trying to persuade me to change my mind in her soft, almost plaintive tone. But the phone was silent, and that silence was louder than any words. By the end of the third week, I had already posted my apartment for rent on several websites, met with 3 potential tenants, and for the first time in my life, I felt empowered to manage my property and my life. Not as a little girl awaiting adult approval, but as a grown woman making my own decisions. I remember the last visit particularly well. A young couple, a doctor and a nurse, holding hands, talking about their work, and respect in their eyes as I showed them the kitchen and the renovated bedroom. I caught myself smiling genuinely, without strain, and thinking, yes, these are the kind of people I want to entrust this house to. That evening, returning home after a meeting, I paused by my apartment window, looked out at the city lights stretching to the horizon, and felt the deep, heavy weariness that had been building within me all this time finally begin to lift. I knew there would still be many difficult conversations and perhaps unpleasant encounters with my family ahead, but now, in that moment for the first time in a long time, I felt peace and a quiet confidence that I would succeed. About 3 months later, one quiet evening, I settled on the couch with a cup of tea and, mechanically scrolling through my Facebook feed, suddenly came across photos from Emma's wedding, and my heart sank. Even though I knew it would appear sooner or later, it still felt strange to see it all on the screen, as if the past had knocked on my door again. I enlarged the photos and examined every detail. The ceremony itself was modest, without the elaborate arches, expensive designer flowers, or the grandeur Emma had dreamed of when she demanded $80,000 from me. The wedding was modest. Yes, the hall was simply decorated, white tablecloths, a few bouquets and vases, upholstered chairs, and a couple of simple garlands. The guests were smiling, but not the beaming grins they boast about at lavish celebrations in expensive restaurants, but casual, calm, almost homely ones. I noticed that Emma's dress was simple, light, without the luxurious lace and corsets she'd spent hours discussing, and she looked more sweet in it than stunning. Not bad, but definitely not the $80,000 she tried to squeeze out of me when we sat at that fateful dinner, and everyone, she, Mom, Robert, even Jake, looked at me as if I had to pay for their happiness. Maybe $15,000 or $20,000, no more, and I could almost hear myself mentally calculating. It would be perfectly possible to throw a decent wedding with that kind of money if I didn't demand everyone around me sacrifice their own futures. I stared at the photos for a long time and suddenly realized that inside me there was no anger, no envy, not even pain. There was only relief, as if life itself had confirmed. I did the right thing when I said no, when I set a boundary, when I chose myself. I closed the laptop and felt such silence around me that it seemed almost sacred. The meeting place wasn't some luxurious hotel, not a hall with crystal chandeliers and marble columns, but a very ordinary community center with beige walls, plastic chairs, and modest decor that looked like it had been bought at a discount at the nearest supermarket. Looking at the photos, it was strange to realize that it was precisely because of this noise and arguments that they were ready to break up with me. Emma's dress, admittedly, was beautiful, but simple. Nothing special. No long train, no sparkling stones, none of the designer delights she once spoke of with a glint in her eyes. Everything around her looked decent, neat, but certainly not pretentious or anything like what she herself had once envisioned in her dreams. Emma looked fine in those photos, but I didn't see any happiness in her face. Her smile wasn't genuine. It was as if she were going through the motions, checking off someone else's script. Jake, next to me, looked perfectly content, relaxed, as if he'd gotten what he wanted. I looked at those photos and felt nothing. No pain, no regret, no envy, only a cool calm that spread through my body. I caught myself thinking that I didn't regret not being there at all, and I didn't feel any sadness about not being invited. They had made their choice, and I had made mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt confident in that choice. 3 months later, late one evening, as I was sitting at home reading, my phone suddenly rang, and my mother's name appeared on the screen. My heart skipped a beat, and I almost put the phone back on the table, intending to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, Victoria, we need to talk to you about Emma," my mother said, her voice betraying a hint of weariness. "What's wrong with her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She and Jake are having financial problems and are looking for a new place, so we thought maybe you could let them move back into Grandma's," she said, as if she were asking to borrow a cup of sugar rather than a chunk of my life. I laughed out loud, almost at the top of my lungs, so loudly that it echoed throughout the empty apartment. "Are you serious? After everything?" I said, barely catching my breath. "It's only temporary until they get back on their feet. Can you consider this helping the family?" My mother continued, as if it were obvious. "Mom, they called me toxic, cut me out of their wedding, and told me I wasn't part of the family. You and Robert supported them. What in all of that should make me want to help them now?" My voice rang with indignation. "That was months ago. People say all sorts of things when they're upset." "We all miss you, dear," she tried to soften. "It's funny how you only miss me when you need something." I smiled bitterly. "It's not fair," she said quietly. "No, it's not fair that you're calling me after months of silence and asking me to save Emma again. The answer is no, absolutely not. Where are they supposed to live now?" Her voice rang out desperately. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." "They're adults. Let them figure it out themselves," I replied. "Victoria, please," Mom almost begged. "No, Mom, I'm done. You've clearly shown that I only have value when I write you checks." "So, the bank is closed," I said and hung up. And then, without thinking, I blocked all their numbers, and my heart sighed with relief, because I probably should have done this a few months ago. It's been over a year since all of this ended. I have wonderful tenants who always pay on time and take good care of the place. The rental income allowed me to pay off the mortgage much faster than I could have dreamed, and I now realize I'll be out of it in 5 years instead of 15. I've made new friends at work, started dating again, and treated myself to a vacation in Europe, something I never thought possible while Emma was living rent-free in my apartment. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my family, and I honestly answer, no. I miss the very idea of a loving, supportive family, but I never had one. Instead, I had a group of people who valued me only as a source of money, and I finally realized that a real family doesn't turn you into an ATM, doesn't mock you at dinner, doesn't demand $20,000 and then turn away if you set boundaries. A real family supports and respects, not breaks or humiliates. And so now I'm better off without them. My life has become calmer, purer, more honest. I spend money on what brings me joy, not on other people's whims. I have friends who truly care about me, who see me as a person, not a wallet. Emma and Jake can solve their own problems, Mom and Robert can look for a new victim to manipulate, and I can finally live the way I want, by my own rules.